the Fantasy Holics Podcast.
Jackson takes it himself. Look at him turn back and forth. Oh, he broke his ankles. Now he's got an entourage, and he's got a touchdown.
Your source for all things fantasy. So fill up your cup, sit back, and enjoy.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Holics Podcast. And today we are doing a very special NBA edition, and we are in the middle of our mini-series where we are breaking down the top draft prospects for this year's NBA draft. My name is Jordan Jaika, aka Dr. Fantasy, and I am here with Zach, who is now the newly minted Fantasy Caveman. And we are ready to... I like that, the little hair flip.
Yeah.
Fantasy Caveman with the hair flip. I dig that. So today we are talking about Florida State. I guess I'll call him a wing, Devin Vassell. So we'll hop right into it, and I'll give you guys a little bit of a preview on him. I think he's a guy that day one has the ability to make an impact. He's a really strong defender. Last season for Florida State, he averaged right around 12 points, 5 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 1 block, and 1.5 steals. Didn't really turn over the ball very often. Had a 41% three-point percentage, 49% overall from the field. So pretty good numbers. Nothing that really stands out. But from day one, he's a really strong defender. So I think that's why he's going to carve out a role. So kick it over to you and let you give your initial thoughts on him.
With Vassell, you mentioned he's solid. I mean, you got he's a very solid shooter. I think when you talk about guys like Vassell, you typically think of like 3-and-D.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you mentioned he was right around 42% his both seasons in college.
Yep.
I think his game is probably well suited. He's probably not like on a championship team, probably not like a starter, but I think he could be like an elite level role player for a championship team.
Yeah, and I think that the way that he plays defense is perfectly suited for today's NBA. When you talk about versatile defenders that cover, I mean, he can cover point guards, 2, 3, 4s, because he's got good size. He's 6'7", 6'10" wingspan, which is good length for his size. So, I mean, he has all the ability in the world. And I think from day one, you're going to look at him as a guy that defends point guards when he's on the floor or the other team's best offensive force. So I think he has that kind of ability on the defensive end. A few things that we'll talk about, pros and cons here. His strengths here. He's got a nice frame. I already mentioned his versatility. He's a very good rebounder. And the thing that I love about him the most that we haven't really talked about is he really hustles and he really plays the game hard. And that's why we'll talk about our NBA comparisons later. I think I have a few good ones for him. But his offensive game is not the strongest, but he is a very solid three-point shooter. And if he improves upon that, he can be a really good 3-and-D player. But from day one, just because he's arguably the best defender in this class, we talked about Josh Green, who's strong too. I think you have a good case for either one of them there. But you know, from day one, he's going to have a role. But I think more than any other prospect, I love his hustle and his tenacity. So I think that's really going to be in his favor.
Like you said, his skill set and his strengths are perfectly ideal for like a elite level role player. I mean, I don't see his game as like a great NBA starter. I'm not trying to knock him or anything, but that's how, I mean, his game projects to be kind of like that elite level role player. He'll do a bit of everything for you off the bench.
Yeah, and I think based on the NBA mocks that we've seen and what scouts are saying about him, seems like they have him going in the late lottery to late first round, somewhere in that range. So that's perfect. I mean, teams in that situation, they probably have a solid starting five, and they're looking for good role players, especially the playoff team. So I think that he's perfectly suited for that role. Few of his weaknesses, he didn't have a ton of assists in college. And we're going to talk about another prospect this week that does not have a lot of assists in college, but he's not a playmaker. He's not that, when you think of a point forward, a big guy that likes to have the ball in his hand. That's just not his game, and I don't necessarily call it a con with guys like that, but it's definitely a weakness just because he knows his role, though. I think that's the takeaway from that, is even though he doesn't have a ton of assists, he kind of knows his role on the offense. Another thing is he's a little skinny for his size right now. I don't usually worry about that too much. Usually once you get in with NBA strength and conditioning coordinators, guys have the ability to bulk up. So that's not a huge concern, but it is something to watch out for. On the offensive end, he's not overly consistent right now. He's a pretty good three-point shooter. He pulls up. He has a nice pull-up jumper. But besides that, doesn't really drive to the basket very consistently. So his offensive game just needs quite a bit of work. So what do you have as a good NBA fit for him?
Yes. Very quickly before we move on to that, I would just like to add to the last point you made. I saw an interesting stat about him. I mean, obviously he led Florida State in scoring this year, but I think I saw an interesting that he was like 11th on the team in not free throw percentage, but like free throw like conversion or some forgot exactly what the stat was, but he was like 11th on the team and into the free throw line. So that's I mean obviously that's not his game, but if you lead the team in scoring, but you're 11th on the team in free throw attempts, that's a bit concerning.
Yeah. Yeah, no, especially in college, too. I mean, he was one of the most talented players on that roster, and if he can beat some of the guys that are probably below him on the depth chart in free throw percentage, or I know what you mean, free throw attempts. So if he can't beat those guys in that, he definitely needs to work on that. And I'll hop into the fit that I have for him. And I've kind of gone back and forth on this a little bit, but I'm going to go with the Kings. And I think the Kings are one of those teams that just needs some talent right now. But one of their weaknesses is they have some guys that are really strong on the offensive side of the ball, but they still need a lockdown defender, in my opinion. De'Aaron Fox is not bad he's an okay defender now in the NBA at the point, but I still think they need a versatile defender and just talent overall. So that's the fit that I have for him.
Oh yeah, I think that's a good fit. And another one that I can see is the Orlando Magic. I mean, you got I think especially with Evan Fournier's contract coming up, he can give you some much needed depth on. He can give him some much needed depth on the wing, and even if Evan Fournier is still there, I mean, the Magic don't really have the shooters, and I think definitely while his game could use some work. I mean, he's probably, if he stepped on the Magic. If he was with the Magic right now, he's probably one of their best shooters.
Mm-hmm.
And that's saying something. The Magic don't really have that shooting. No.
Yeah, I'll throw out two other team names that I was kind of thinking, and I might as well throw them out there. But based on his hustle and the way that he kind of plays that tenacious defense that I mentioned earlier, he kind of reminds me of a prototypical Spurs or Grizzlies player. When I think of the Spurs, I always think of versatile defenders, guys that hustle and play the game the right way. So the Spurs kind of have a hole right now. I mean, they're kind of in transition right now, but they have DeRozan there, but they still are kind of missing wing forward slash guard player. So I think he could fit in there. And same with the Grizzlies. I mean, they have Jackson and Ja there, but I still think that when I think of the Grizzlies, I still think of Zach Randolph and just when they played really tough defense. I think that's what they want to do. So they could use a good defender as well. I think that they'll probably draft in the range that he'll go to. So I think both of those teams could be solid fits for him as well.
Yeah, no argument here. That like I said, his game and the way he plays, he's a fit for. You could really make a case for almost any team in the league.
Yeah. Yep. I would agree with that. So we'll go over to NBA comparisons. I'm going to throw out a bunch of names. I had a bunch of names that he kind of reminded me of. We have an article coming out on him this week as well. The guy who wrote the article said Robert Covington, just a 3-and-D player, really good defender, solid three-point shooter. And, Covington is kind of like that bench player slash spot starter right now, so I think that's a good comparison. He said his ceiling is Jimmy Butler, and actually I kind of like that because Jimmy Butler is known for, people forget when Jimmy Butler was at Marquette, he was not good offensively at all. I'm actually a Marquette basketball fan. I follow Marquette pretty closely, and he was not a good offensive player there. He was kind of similar to Vassell here, a really strong defender. He was known for his hustle, good defense, and Jimmy Butler's offensive game really took off in the NBA. So if Vassell works on his offensive game that way, I kind of get why that's a good comparison for him. Two other names that I have that I think are good, kind of just reasonable comparisons for him. I have Jay Crowder, also from Marquette. He's bounced around through different NBA teams, but more of a bench player, makes spot starts every once in a while. Good defender, good hustle. The other one that I really like is DeMarre Carroll, the junkyard dog, who's kind of been known for his tenacious defense, really hustling, playing hard. Not a great offensive player, but, he's solid. He's can stretch the floor a little bit. So I think the DeMarre Carroll comparison is really fair for him. And I think Jimmy Butler's kind of his ceiling.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I'm at this point, I kind of think of him more as like a 3-and-D guy. So you throw a name like Danny Green out there, who's been a solid contributor for many years for several different teams. And another name that popped to mind was OG Anunoby of the Raptors. Yeah, I think the way they have similar height and their versatility and how the potential on the defensive end for Vassell, I think, is very similar to like Anunoby. Although I know I get it, Anunoby is a bit heavier, but I think that's something that Vassell can build out.
Yeah, for sure. Any other final notes, or I think that's all that I have on him.
Nope, not much. Like he's one of these. He's just one of these guys. I don't know if you mentioned his age. He's 19, I believe.
Yeah.
Or is he 19? So he's one of the. For only being 19, I know we talked about this. I talked about this with Josh Green, but for him only being 19, he's fairly his NBA readiness is impressive for only being 19.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. So I think that's all the notes that we have on Vassell today. So thank you guys for watching. If you don't already, make sure you subscribe to the Fantasyholics YouTube channel. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Fantasyholics1, and make sure you check out our new website at thefantasyholics.com. And we will see you guys next time.